The function of an economic system is to distribute resources among the people of a society. In a modern system like our own, the resource to be distributed is money, and the effectiveness of that system can be measured in two ways: how much money is generated and how evenly it is dispersed. The U.S. economy is very effective at generating money. We are the richest nation on the planet with an annual GDP of over $16 trillion. However, as we'll see, that money is very unevenly distributed, and the enormous amount of wealth is held by very few people, so that in a country as rich as America there is also a significant problem with poverty. In this presentation we'll take a look at how that money is distributed, what are the effects of that unequal distribution, and who are the poor in American society. As we look at the data about wealth and poverty, keep in mind that far more is involved in whether someone has a big bank account or a small one. Wealth is ultimately about power and prestige, about the ability to get your way and have things done according to your liking. The benefits of being rich go far beyond owning an expensive car and a house in a gated community, just as the costs of being poor go beyond driving a junker car and living in a trailer. The rich in our society live longer lives and enjoy better health. They receive the best educations. They have political influence. They can afford the best lawyers and accountants and may well pay a lower tax rate than you. On the flip side, poor people die younger, have inadequate health care, and go to inferior schools. They suffer more mental illness and addiction. They are more likely to grow up in a single-parent home, to get divorced, to be the victim of a crime, and to also go to prison. One fact that studies reveal is that most Americans do not understand how unevenly wealth is distributed in American society. As shown in this pie chart, the top 1% of Americans possess 37% of the total wealth in the United States, and the top 10% own 73% of the national wealth. The top 10% of Americans have more wealth than the other 90% of Americans combined. If we expand it to the top 20% of Americans, they possess 84% of the nation's wealth, which leaves 80% of Americans splitting 16%. The bottom 40% on their own are splitting only 0.3%, and the bottom 20% of Americans split 0.1%, live in debt, and have no net worth. Another way of looking at economic distribution is by analyzing household income. Household income refers to the total income per household brought in by all the income earners in the home. As this graph makes clear, 50% of American families earn $50,000 or less per year. 30% earn between $50,000 to $100,000. 16.5% earn $100,000 to $200,000, and only 4.5% of Americans earn over $200,000 a year. When we break down those figures by economic class, 50% of Americans belong to the lower middle class, the working class, and the lower class. 30% belong to the middle class, 16.5% belong to the upper middle, and 4.5% belong to the upper class. Median household income has also been declining. In the year 2000, it stood at $56,000. By the end of 2012, it had fallen to $50,500. The 2012 household income in North Carolina was even lower, at $41,500, and in Jackson County it was $36,826. Lower incomes in North Carolina reflect the fact that the South is the poorest region in the country, as this graph depicts. The beige line displays poverty percentages in 1969 and the orange line in 2013. In 2013, over 41% of all the nation's poor lived in the South. That is compared to 16.1% in the Northeast, 19% in the Midwest, and 23.8% in the West. The South has a significantly disproportional percentage of the nation's poor. This income and wealth disparity has become especially pronounced among the richest of the rich. The top 0.1% have gotten extraordinarily richer over the past decades, while the wealth of the other 99% has remained essentially flat. During the recession in 2008 to 2009, the top 1/10 made a lot of money, while everyone else lost it. When Americans are asked how they think wealth is distributed in the United States, they tend to think our society is more equitable than it actually is. On this slide, the top line is how Americans believe it is distributed, the second line is what they believe would be ideal, and the bottom line is reality. There is an official definition of poverty, and this slide shows the official poverty guidelines of the federal government. This is what is used to assess eligibility for assistance programs. It is determined by estimating the necessary food budget for each family size and then multiplying by 3. Based on these guidelines, 15% of the American population lives in poverty. Even worse, 23% of all American children, 1 in 4, live in families below the poverty line. That means 16 million American children live with food insecurity and struggle with hunger at different times during the year. Poverty is also unevenly distributed by race. Racial minorities are overrepresented among people living in poverty. Unsurprisingly, education levels also have a great deal to do with poverty rates. Don't quit school. A college education makes it much less likely that you will live in poverty. Only 30% of Americans have a bachelor's degree. Being poor is made more difficult by the social stigma attached to poverty in American culture. Americans tend to blame the poor for being poor and express a great deal of resentment for money spent on assistance programs. This resentment is based on 2 falsehoods Americans generally believe about poverty. Falsehood number 1 is that people stay poor and on government assistance for their lifetimes. The fact is that most poor Americans cycle in and out of poverty. Working in low-paying jobs, they hover above the poverty threshold until becoming unemployed or having medical bills or some other problem that pulls them back into poverty. Falsehood number 2 is that poor Americans are lazy. The truth is that most poor Americans have a job and work, but their jobs do not pay enough to escape poverty. One person does not bring home enough money or does not have regular full-time hours, but if 2 people work, then no one is home to watch the children, or one person spends most of the paycheck on child care. In addition, their jobs lack health benefits, leaving them exposed to expensive medical bills. As a result, people work, but fail to get ahead, living on the edge, one problem away from insolvency. The fact is that there is not equal opportunity or equal access to the American dream.